At a time of war, in the heart of Nebraska, soldiers and citizens came together at the Kearney Army Airfield.
The whole area here was mobilized to support the base.
Many were faces in the crowd. Others were famous.
We heard all of this noise and we ran to look and see what it was, and it was Clark Gable.
It was a small base that made a big impact on the Second World War and changed a small city forever. Now, it's up to a new generation to preserve its story.
A lot of history is looking at the tiny details, the infrastructure of Nebraska. It was using what it had to help.
Kearney goes to war, remembering the home front. This hangar is one of the last remaining structures of the Kearney Army Airfield. The airfield was an important part of Nebraska's contribution to World War II. But today, there are no plaques or structures to memorialize the base or what was accomplished here. What made the airfield special, and what's being done today to tell its story?
My name is Jeff Wells. I'm an assistant professor of history at the University of Nebraska at Kearney. When I moved here to Kearney, I decided that a digitization project or the creation of a digital archive would be the place to start. So I went and visited with some folks in the community, and I asked them what interested them. And they kept coming back to a project about Kearney's contribution to World War II and the Kearney Army Airfield. I think that several Nebraska communities have done a great job of recognizing their World War II history. Omaha had the Army Air Force base in the Martin Manufacturing Facility and was the home of the scrap metal drive. North Platte had the canteen. Hastings recognized their contribution with the Naval Ordnance Depot, Grand Island with the Army Ammunition Plant. But I think Kearney has not always recognized, or at least has not as consistently recognized itself, and externally, Kearney's contribution to the war has not been as recognized as some of the efforts from those other Nebraska communities.
Following the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Army Air Force began assembling the largest air armada of all time. The Plains states provided an ideal location for manufacturing and training facilities. Not only was the terrain flat and the climate mild, but the plains were far less vulnerable to attack than the coasts. Kearney campaigned hard for the opportunity to host a military facility and the millions of government dollars that would be spent. Kearney's was one of 12 air bases to be built in Nebraska. When Kearney was selected in September of 1941, it was decided that the city's municipal airport would be inadequate for the Army's needs, and a completely new airport would need to be built. This would bring thousands of people into the small city.
When it was announced that the base was going to be built, everybody was very happy about it, but real quick there started to be people filtering in from all over to work on it, and the city had to come up with housing for somewhere between 2,500 and 3,000 people. And so rooms were doubled up, people were renting basements, the hotels were all full.
Kearney was just a typical average farming community. And then when the war came and we got the air base, boy, this was a wild place. I mean, they built that thing, and all the runways and everything, you know. So a lot of people came in and moved in to do that construction work and help with that, maintain and provide services, and it totally changed. I mean, it really did.
Switch that and see what
You want me to put it in
Yeah.
the same spot?
Yeah, put it.
Traditionally, history students produce work in the form of papers and term papers, 30-page papers at the end of the semester. That is not the only way that we communicate now. We found different ways for our students to share the results of their work and to communicate their ideas. The students benefit from not only learning more about the technology, but also about the content, learning the history of central Nebraska, of Kearney, of the airfield, and it allows them to ask questions that they might not otherwise ask about their community. We're doing this project probably 10 or 20 years too late. Many of the veterans, or most of the veterans that served at Kearney Army Airfield, and many of the community members that interacted with the soldiers that were stationed there are now deceased.
I called it a crisis, you know?
Well, it was.
We had a crisis, didn't we?
We did.
Every man, woman, and child was involved in doing some volunteer work to help the boys in the service.
Mm-hmm.
Right here, I am recording cassette tapes of World War II veterans that were interviewed in 1988, and I am digitizing them or putting them on a computer so that they can last for a far longer time. Can I say the most interesting interview? Sure. It was a Cajun from Louisiana entered the war, and he didn't speak English. He only speaks French, so he had his nephew there translating both to him and to the interviewer. So about 70% of the interview is in French.
He was in the service for only 1 month before he came to Kearney. Because of the language problem, he never went through boot camp or anything. He was simply inducted into the service and given a uniform, and he was sent to Kearney, Nebraska.
Okay. Then how long were you here at the air base?
2 years and 10 months.
Generally knowing that I'm helping record history, I think that's really cool. And I get to listen to people's accounts on a huge event in history. And it's astounding.
We were in charge of getting people in and out of Kearney and getting them all ready to go to the war, and they would take you from there.
Kearney was a processing base. What processing amounted to, it processed both airplanes and the men. The airplanes came here straight from the factory. Some of them needed modifications before they went overseas. You had several different variants of each airplane over time, and so there were a lot of maintenance issues that had to be done. Lower octane fuel had been drained out of the airplanes. They had 100 octane in when they left. The guns were loaded and mounted, and the whole airplane got a real thorough check before they sent it off, because once they left here, they were going straight in combat.
They'd make these 20-year-old guys sign for the airplane, like they were going to be charged for it if they didn't bring it back or if they got it scratched. And I've had a local farmer tell me about it. Just scared him to death to have to personally sign for that aircraft.
They were all fresh out of training. Next step is combat, so they had a number of things they needed to do. They might write wills, they might buy life insurance, they might get their teeth fixed, get their shots. And another thing that was important that happened during processing was that the people at Kearney that were doing the processing would try to weed out the incompetents who had somehow gotten through the training and gotten to that point, at which time they were yanked out of the Air Forces and put into the infantry. It was an important base. The rest of the air bases in Nebraska were all operated under Kearney as the main base, with the exception of the one in Omaha. But the other thing that should be remembered is the contribution that the civilians made.
The whole area here was mobilized, and they came in from quite a ways away to support the base here. Ladies come in from the farm and pack parachutes, for example. There was a WAC mechanics group here where they were working on the engines. And just all aspects of the base life, there were civilian and military workers.
And this was true all over the country. Everybody wanted to do their bit, and so there was no shortage of people that were trying to help. And had we not had the cooperation of the civilians for that war, would we still have won it? Most likely, but it would have taken a lot longer. And we'd have had to have had a military that was 3 or 4 times the size because of all the contributions that the civilians made. So the base at Kearney, in many ways, is a microcosm of what went on across the country as far as people having an opportunity to really contribute to the war effort.
No, I don't know anything about Nebraska's role in World War II.
Well, a lot of students from Kearney High and UNK served in World War II, and a lot of them died. And that's all I really know.
What I know about World War II,
on a scale of 1 to 10, I probably know 0.4.
In the 1800s, maybe.
A lot of people I'll talk to be like, I mean, history, it's interesting, I guess, but why does that pertain to me? Not at all, unless it affects me right now. Kind of why I want to be a teacher is like, this is very useful information. It's history is part of everything. My generation is kind of all focused on technology as far as something that they can get quickly. We like to have something that's in our grasp almost immediately, and as far as it's not so much we have a short attention span. We just are so ready. We're so eager to give me all this information.
To find out about history, I usually use the internet.
I definitely go to the internet.
I go straight to Wikipedia.
I wouldn't likely anymore probably go to the library just because most of the stuff would probably be available online in seconds.
It's really important to get us interested with the information being very easy to access and easy to use.
The Kearney Goes to War project is the first exhibit on the website that is being developed by the history department here at UNK. With it, we hope to expand to talk about other stories related to Kearney and Buffalo County and other local history topics. This project allows for not only local folks to engage with it, but also a potentially global audience. I foresee that folks who had grandparents, great-grandparents, uncles who served in Kearney will be interested in the information that we post.
Shacks that they put up out there for us to live in was about next to nothing. Then they had the guts to feed us with that food out there. Every other spoonful was sand.
Thousands of soldiers had left the comforts of home behind, and it was up to the citizens of Kearney to provide them with hospitality.
Many of the families kind of adopted these young fellas and invited them into their homes for home-cooked meals and picnics and other things.
Among the ways the Kearney soldiers stayed entertained, the most popular were easily the dances. Dances were an almost nightly event with big-name acts regularly coming to the base or to clubs in the surrounding area.
We had Harry James and we had Tommy Dorsey, and then they had big-name bands come in there because they were going across country, and they'd make that stop and have pick up a few dollars and then keep on going.
The biggest problem had to do with turning a couple of thousand testosterone-laden young men loose in the community. And the parents were justifiably worried about what could result. They formed what was called the Hostess Club. And to be a member of the Hostess Club, you had to be at least 18 and single and of good moral standing. it was organized along military lines. They had captains and colonels, and the captains and the colonels consisted of older women from Kearney who served as chaperones. This pretty much allayed everyone's fears, and it worked very well throughout the war. It wasn't until the tail end of the war that it kind of fell apart, and that was because there were so many young women that were attending the dances at the air base that the whole chaperone thing just kind of disintegrated.
Another result of the boosted population, the presence of black soldiers, meant Kearney had to begin enforcing the racial segregation practices common at the time. This included separate facilities for blacks and whites.
The thing you have to remember about it is that a white soldier could go into any tavern in town and buy a beer, but that wasn't possible for the blacks. So they got right to work on building a black servicemen's club. The spot that they chose for it happened to be right across the street from the Methodist Church. And at that time, there was a very active dry movement in Nebraska, and most of the clergy in Kearney objected strongly to the fact that this was going to be right across the street from the church. But what ultimately happened was that the commanding officer put his foot down. He said, you have to find a place where these guys can congregate and drink beer. And if you don't, then we're going to restrict everybody to base and not allow any of the troops into town. Well, these guys were real free spenders. And certainly the city council didn't want to see them restricted to base. So right away there was another meeting held, and they promptly approved the location on Avenue A. And they announced that the beer would be free until such time as they obtained a liquor license.
I worked in a shining parlor here in Kearney, a shoe shine boy. It was really crowded in Kearney, and especially on Saturdays. Those guys would come into town. One Saturday afternoon in the summertime, we heard all of this commotion outside. The Shining Parlor was right 2 doors north of what used to be the Fort Theater. We heard all of this noise, and we ran to look and see what it was. Big crowd of people outside with a lot of people around, and it was Clark Gable. And he was stationed here for several weeks before he went overseas. And so he was just as good looking in person as he was. But we couldn't go out because our boss said, hey, stay inside here. But we got to stand and watch him and so forth, and that was quite exciting.
Especially for the airmen that were passing through. It was the last real impression of America that they got before they left, because again, when they left here, they went straight overseas. They didn't sit in Maine for 2 weeks waiting to go. The people in the community went out of their way to try to make them feel welcome.
My mother joined the USO. She met a lot of the fellas that were coming through, young guys, and some of them she had exchange addresses with. She was going to write to them in the theater of war. And many of her letters came back killed in action, not deliverable. And that was the very first letter after they left here. So some of them were dead within 3 days, 4 days of being here.
Part of our hope through this project is that we will make the public and researchers more aware of what is available at the Buffalo County Historical Society and the Trails and Rails Museum, but to also allow them to preserve and to reduce the demands for the original materials.
And as you're coming, you can see, like this used to be a great display that everyone loved to see, but now you can hardly get back to it. And then this is overflow, and you kind of have to go sideways here, so please be careful. We have boxes that are labeled genealogy, education. We have tons of judicial records and government records from the county. Again, all of this should be out in the archive so that we can access it. I was told that the year before me that there were no boxes in this room, that it was just loose paper everywhere. We have things dropped off, not quite every day, but probably 3 times a week. Things are dropped off, people wanting to donate them to us. We cannot accept everything, but if it is Buffalo County related and it does hold a good piece of history, the committee is likely to accept it. The archives is overflowing into every single building on property. Every closet, under beds, under tables, right here all the way around me. There's items that people are wanting to look at to do research, and we can't even access it right now. There's so many projects that I would love to see done, and there's a whole list of to-dos if we ever have the time or the resources to do it. And they're just gonna sit on that list to be done sometime. So when we have a whole group come in here, it's gonna get done.
The airplanes here, boy, they would come over the town and just roar, you know. They were such low level, and we would be out on softball field playing or something, and then the waist gunners would always be in position, and we'd wave, and they'd always wave back, just real friendly, and so it was pretty exciting for little guys, you know.
During World War II, the bulk of the planes processed at the base were B-17 and B-29 bombers, many of which were constructed in Omaha. Operations on the base were not without risk. On multiple occasions, practice flights would result in crashes, several resulting in deaths.
There were something like 350 airplanes that got wrecked in Nebraska during the war. Not all of them were based here, but most of them were. There was a certain amount of danger with it, you know, and you got to remember that these airplanes, the B-17 was an old design, but the 29, they took that, they approved it on the drawing board and said, build 1,000 of them, you know, and they had all kinds of problems with B-29s. So much so that people were reluctant to fly them. Towards the end of the war, my father had an opportunity to transition from B-24s to B-29s, and he didn't want to have a thing to do with it. How he got out of it, I don't know. But he never flew them, and it was only because they had such a lousy reputation. Now later on, they got most of the bugs worked out, and it became a fine airplane. But that was true of a lot of the airplanes that we had. We had a war to win. We had a design here for an airplane, so they built them. You know, if it's not a real safe airplane, that's just tough. You know, we got a war, you're gonna have to fly it.
With World War II coming to an end, operations of the base were dramatically reduced. The base hosted the 27th Fighter Wing during the early years of the Cold War, but shrinking defense budgets led to the base's closure in March of 1949. While many soldiers headed home, others stayed to begin families and new lives in Kearney, a town forever changed by the war and the airfield.
The population was stirred by the air base. People who might have stayed on the farm really got a more worldly outlook out of it, I think. And they were all part of something bigger than themselves. And they had the worst of times, but in some ways the best of times, to paraphrase some author.
The college grew by leaps and bounds. The GIs came back from the service, and a good percentage of those guys went to school here on GI Bill.
Everyone associated with the air base had a job to do, a role to play, and a contribution to make to the heritage of those who would follow. That contribution does not become irrelevant merely because a younger generation decides to ignore it, but it does become lost to history and impossible to appreciate unless we make an effort to preserve and remember it. And I'm not aiming that at the younger generation, so that the air base was allowed to fall into disrepair immediately after the war and through the 50s, and there was no effort made to save anything other than the runway, and not even all the runways. In Kearney, the one runway became Kearney Dragway. I think they chopped the other one up and got rid of the concrete. Air base, well, the hangars there were all built with a 5-year life expectancy, except for the steel one, which is still there today, and it'll probably be there for a long time.
In history, we look at these big events, this whole grand picture, when a lot of history is looking at the tiny details, not only in Kearney, but in North Platte and Grand Island, and this whole area were just really important in how the infrastructure of Nebraska, it was using what it had to help.
People are interested in history. People want to know more about the past. People are interested in the story of the people who lived in the place that they lived 70 years before. But what people don't enjoy isn't necessarily how we as historians have always presented that information. They want to be able to engage with and interact the information that they want. Now, when somebody will go online to learn more about the Kearney Army Airfield, we'll provide them a great resource that is grounded in scholarship and is in a form that they will find interesting and that will hopefully spark their interest in what we do as historians.